The champagne flutes clinked together in the opulent ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, but the sound felt like nails on a chalkboard to Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan. He stood at the edge of the grand celebration, watching his father, Senator William Brennan, bask in the adoration of high society as he announced his engagement to Victoria Ashford, a woman barely 5 years older than Marcus himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," his father's booming voice carried across the room, "I'd like you all to meet my beautiful fiancée, Victoria, and her remarkable daughter, Captain Elena Ashford." Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he observed the young woman in military dress uniform standing beside his father's bride-to-be. Captain Ashford was striking, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, her bearing confident and professional. She couldn't have been more than 28, which made her his junior by 4 years, though her captain's bars indicated she was climbing the ranks quickly. "And of course," Senator Brennan continued with a theatrical gesture toward Marcus, "my own son is here tonight. Marcus has been playing soldier for quite some time now, haven't you, son?" The room erupted in polite laughter. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but years of military discipline kept his expression neutral. Playing soldier. The words cut deeper than any blade. 16 years of service, Marcus's father continued, his tone dripping with condescension, and still just a lieutenant colonel. But then again, not everyone can be a leader, can they? Some people are just better suited to taking orders. More laughter. Marcus noticed Captain Ashford's expression shift slightly, a flicker of something, confusion, discomfort, crossing her features, but she said nothing. Victoria Ashford, radiant in her designer gown, squeezed the senator's arm affectionately. "William, you're terrible," she laughed. "I'm sure Marcus has had a distinguished career." "Oh, I'm sure he's done his best," the senator replied dismissively. "But let's be honest, if he had any real leadership potential, he'd have made full colonel by now. Or better yet, he'd have left the military and gone into politics like his old man. But Marcus has always lacked vision, ambition, the killer instinct that separates the wheat from the chaff." The conversation moved on, but Marcus remained frozen in place, watching his father charm the crowd with stories of his political conquests, while occasionally throwing casual barbs about his son's mediocre military career. Each comment was delivered with a smile, wrapped in paternal affection, making it impossible to object without seeming petty or ungrateful. After the formal announcements ended, Marcus found himself at the bar, nursing a whiskey and trying to process the evening's humiliation. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, led successful missions that saved countless lives, and earned decorations that most soldiers could only dream of. Yet, here in his father's world, none of that mattered. "Excuse me, sir?" Marcus turned to find Captain Ashford approaching. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "I wanted to introduce myself properly," she said, extending her hand. "Elena Ashford. I believe we'll be family soon." "Marcus Brennan," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "And congratulations on your mother's engagement." "Thank you." She paused, studying his face. "I have to ask, what unit are you with?" "Your father mentioned you're in the Army, but he was rather vague about the details." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't casual curiosity. "I'm currently assigned to the Pentagon," Marcus said carefully. "Joint Operations Coordination." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. "Pentagon assignment for a lieutenant colonel is pretty significant. That's not exactly playing soldier, as your father put it." Marcus felt a bitter smile tug at his lips. "No, it's not." But then again, My father has never really understood what military service entails. What's your background? Infantry? Special Forces? Rangers, initially. Then Special Operations Command. I've been working joint operations for the past 3 years. Elena's expression shifted subtly, and Marcus caught something that looked like recognition flicker across her features. But before he could identify it, she was called away by her mother. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of political small talk and barely concealed slights from his father. By the time Marcus left the hotel, he'd made a decision. He was done trying to win his father's approval. Done subjecting himself to public humiliation for the sake of family unity. But what he didn't know was that Captain Elena Ashford had made her own decision that night, and it would change everything. 3 weeks later, Marcus was deep in preparation for a joint training exercise when his aide knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's a Captain Ashford here to see you. She says it's urgent." Marcus looked up from his briefing materials, surprised. "Send her in." Elena entered his office, and Marcus immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. Gone was the polite, social version of the woman he'd met at the engagement party. This was a soldier, all business and barely contained energy. "Colonel Brennan," she said, closing the door behind her, "we need to talk." "Please, have a seat." "What can I do for you, Captain?" Elena remained standing. 3 weeks ago, at the engagement party, you told me you were assigned to Joint Operations Coordination at the Pentagon. "That's correct." "You said you had a background in Rangers and Special Operations Command." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure where this was heading. Elena reached into her briefing folder and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on his desk, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. It was picture of him in full combat gear, standing with a group of Afghan commandos in front of a destroyed Taliban compound. He remembered the mission. It had been classified at the highest levels, a precision strike that had eliminated a key terrorist cell planning attacks on American interests. "Operation Nighthawk," Elena said quietly. "September 2019. You led a joint special operations team that infiltrated and neutralized a high-value target compound in Kandahar province. 17 Taliban operatives eliminated, including 2 high-level commanders, with 0 American casualties." Marcus stared at the photograph, then looked up at Elena. "How do you have this?" "Because I was there," she said simply. "Not on the mission itself, but at Forward Operating Base Chapman when you returned. I was a second lieutenant then, fresh out of West Point, assigned to intelligence analysis. Your mission briefings crossed my desk." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing Marcus receiving the Distinguished Service Cross in a private Pentagon ceremony. "You received this for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy," Elena continued. "The citation specifically mentions your leadership under fire and your innovative tactical approach that prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence breach." Marcus said nothing, but his mind was racing. Elena pulled out a third document, his complete service record. 3 Bronze Stars, 2 with V device for valor, the Distinguished Service Cross, a Silver Star from your second tour, multiple commendations for exceptional leadership. She looked up at him. "Colonel Brennan, you're not just any lieutenant colonel. You're being fast-tracked for brigadier general. Your promotion board is in 6 months, and according to my sources in personnel, it's all but guaranteed." The silence stretched between them before Marcus finally spoke. "Why are you showing me this, Captain?" Elena's expression softened slightly. "Because 3 weeks ago, I watched a United States senator publicly humiliate one of the most decorated officers of our generation. I watched him mock a man who has literally bled for this country, who has saved American lives through his courage and leadership." Her voice hardened. "And I realized that your father has absolutely no idea who you really are." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "And what exactly do you propose to do about that?" Elena smiled, and for the first time Marcus saw something almost predatory in her expression. "Well, that depends. How much do you trust your future stepsister?" The plan Elena proposed was elegant in its simplicity. Senator Brennan was hosting another party in 2 weeks, this time to celebrate his recent appointment to the Senate Armed Services Committee. It would be attended by high-ranking military officials, defense contractors, and political elite from across Washington. "He'll want to show off," Elena explained as they sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop near the Capitol. "Big names, impressive guests, and he'll almost certainly take another shot at you if you attend." "I wasn't planning to attend," Marcus admitted. "You are now," Elena said firmly, "because this time you won't be going alone." She outlined her strategy with military precision. Through her connections and her mother's growing influence in Washington's social circles, Elena had managed to secure invitations for several key figures. General Patricia Hayes, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army; Admiral Robert Chen, the Director of Joint Operations; Colonel Sarah Martinez, who had served with Marcus in Afghanistan and was now a Pentagon spokesperson. "The beauty is that your father won't recognize any of them initially," Elena explained. "To him, they'll just be more brass at his party. But when they start talking about their experiences working with you, when they start sharing stories about your leadership and your missions—" Marcus shook his head. "Elena, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this seems elaborate and risky. If this backfires—" "It won't backfire," she interrupted, "because everything they're going to say about you is true. We're not creating a fiction, Marcus. We're simply making sure the truth gets heard." Over the following weeks, Elena proved to be a master strategist. She'd researched every guest, every connection, every possible angle. She'd even arranged for a military photographer to be present, someone who happened to have covered several of Marcus's missions and had brought along some of his work. The night of the party, Marcus arrived at his father's Georgetown mansion, feeling like he was preparing for a combat mission. Elena met him at the door, stunning in her dress uniform, her medals perfectly arranged. "Ready for this, Colonel?" she asked with a slight smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." The evening began much as the engagement party had. Senator Brennan held court in his study, regaling guests with political anecdotes while drinks flowed freely. Marcus noticed the careful positioning of Elena's invited guests throughout the room, close enough to overhear conversations, but not obviously grouped together. About an hour into the party, the moment Elena had orchestrated finally arrived. "Marcus!" Senator Brennan's voice boomed across the study. "Come here, son. I want you to meet General Hayes. General, this is my son I was telling you about, still trying to make something of himself in the Army." General Hayes, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, extended her hand to Marcus. "Lieutenant Colonel Brennan," she said formally, "it's an honor to finally meet you in person." Senator Brennan looked puzzled. "Oh, do you two know each other?" "Know each other?" General Hayes's eyebrows rose. "Senator, your son is one of the most respected special operations officers in the entire U.S. military. I've been following his career for years." The conversation in the immediate vicinity began to quiet as people turned to listen. "I'm sorry," Senator Brennan said with a forced laugh, "but I think there might be some confusion. Marcus is just a lieutenant colonel. He's never—" "Senator," Admiral Chen interjected, approaching the group with his drink in hand, "with all due respect, your son led the joint operations team that prevented what could have been the most devastating intelligence breach in modern military history. The mission he commanded in Kandahar saved American lives and disrupted terrorist operations across the entire region. Marcus felt the room's attention focusing on them, conversations dying as more people gathered to listen. Furthermore, Colonel Martinez added, joining the circle, I had the privilege of serving under Colonel Brennan's command in Afghanistan. I've never seen better tactical leadership under fire. The man is a natural-born leader. Senator Brennan's face was beginning to flush. Gentlemen, ladies, I appreciate your politeness, but surely you're thinking of someone else. My son has had a perfectly adequate military career, but nothing like what you're describing. Senator, General Hayes said, her voice carrying the authority of her rank. Perhaps you're not aware of your son's achievements because most of his missions have been classified. But I can tell you that Lieutenant Colonel Brennan is being considered for early promotion to Brigadier General. His record is simply exceptional. A murmur ran through the crowd. Early promotion to general was rare and prestigious. Elena chose that moment to approach the group, her timing perfect. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said sweetly, but I couldn't help overhearing. Senator Brennan, I think you might be interested to know that Colonel Brennan is actually the youngest officer to ever receive the Distinguished Service Cross for actions in Afghanistan. She produced her phone, showing a photo of Marcus receiving the medal from the Secretary of Defense. Elena, Senator Brennan said tightly, I don't think— Oh, but there's more, Elena continued, her voice bright but her eyes steely. Would you like to see the photos from Operation Nighthawk? I have them right here. She began swiping through images on her phone, each one showing Marcus in various stages of the mission that had made him a legend in special operations circles. This is fascinating, the military photographer Elena had arranged to attend said, appearing as if summoned. Colonel Brennan, I actually covered that mission. Would you mind if I showed some of my work from that operation? Before Marcus could respond, the photographer was setting up a tablet, displaying high-resolution images of the mission. The crowd pressed closer, and Marcus found himself in the surreal position of watching his father's guests react with awe and respect to his military accomplishments. My God, someone whispered, is that really the Taliban compound that was considered impregnable? Single-night operation, Admiral Chen confirmed. 17 enemy combatants neutralized, no American casualties, and they recovered intelligence that prevented at least 3 major terrorist attacks on American soil. Senator Brennan stood in the center of the growing crowd, his face pale as he watched his son receive praise from some of the most powerful military leaders in the country. Senator, General Hayes said, turning to him with barely concealed disapproval, I have to say, if I had a son with Colonel Brennan's record, I'd be incredibly proud. His service record is the kind that legends are built on. In fact, Elena added, producing one final document, I thought you might like to see this. She handed Senator Brennan an official letter with Department of Defense letterhead. As he read it, his face went from pale to ashen. What is it, dear? Victoria asked, concerned by her fiancé's expression. Elena answered for him, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. It's Colonel Brennan's notification that he's been selected for promotion to Brigadier General, the youngest officer to achieve that rank in the past 15 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt every eye in the room on him and his father, watching as the senator processed the reality of his son's achievements. Furthermore, Elena continued relentlessly. General Brennan, as he'll be known in 3 months, has been selected to head the new Joint Counterterrorism Task Force. It's a position that was created specifically for him, recognizing his unique expertise and leadership capabilities. Senator Brennan looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting Marcus's for the first time in the evening. In that moment, Marcus saw something he'd never seen before in his father's expression, genuine shock, and perhaps the beginnings of understanding. I had no idea," the senator said quietly. "No," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "You didn't. Because you never asked. You never wanted to know. You were so convinced that anything outside of politics was beneath your notice that you never bothered to learn what your son actually did for a living." The room remained silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "For 16 years, Marcus continued, I've served my country with honor. I've led men and women in combat, saved American lives, and earned the respect of my peers and superiors. But none of that ever mattered to you, because it wasn't what you wanted for me." General Hayes stepped forward. "Senator, with all due respect, you have raised a son who embodies the very best of American military leadership. The men and women who serve under him would follow him into hell, and they trust him with their lives because he's proven, time and again, that he's worthy of that trust. The last time I checked," Admiral Chen added, "defending one's country and saving American lives was a pretty admirable calling. I'm not sure why anyone would mock that kind of service." Marcus watched his father struggle to find words, saw him glance around the room at the faces of Washington's military elite, all of them now viewing him with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disapproval. Elena moved to stand beside Marcus, her presence a subtle but powerful statement of support. "Senator," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I think what everyone here is trying to tell you is that you have a son to be incredibly proud of. The question is whether you're ready to recognize that." The aftermath of that evening was swift and decisive. Within days, the story had spread through Washington's political and military circles. Senator Brennan had publicly humiliated a decorated war hero who happened to be his own son, only to be educated about his son's achievements by the very military leaders he was supposed to work with on the Armed Services Committee. The political ramifications were severe. Senator Brennan found himself facing criticism from colleagues who questioned his judgment and his understanding of military issues. Several veterans organizations publicly condemned his comments about his son's service. But the personal ramifications were even more profound. 3 days after the party, Marcus received a call from his father. It was the first time they'd spoken since that night, and the conversation was awkward, halting, filled with long silences and false starts. "I owe you an apology," Senator Brennan finally said. "I had no idea about your achievements. Your mother always said you were doing important work, but I thought she was just being supportive." "Mom knew," Marcus said quietly. "She's always known. She reads every commendation, every fitness report. She keeps a scrapbook of newspaper articles that mention my missions." There was a long pause. "I didn't know that either." "No," Marcus said, "you didn't. Because you never asked either of us." The conversation ended without resolution, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, Senator Brennan made awkward but genuine attempts to learn about his son's career. He read through Marcus's service record, spoke with other military families, and gradually began to understand the magnitude of what his son had accomplished. The transformation wasn't instant or complete, but it was real. When Marcus's promotion to brigadier general was officially announced, Senator Brennan was there for the ceremony, his pride evident despite his discomfort with military protocol. Elena, meanwhile, had become an integral part of Marcus's life. What had begun as a strategic alliance had evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared understanding of duty and honor. "You know," Marcus said one evening as they walked through Arlington National Cemetery. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another political socialite playing at being a soldier." Elena laughed. "And I thought you were a bitter officer who'd been passed over for promotion because you lacked political connections. We were both wrong." "Were we?" Marcus asked, stopping beside a particularly impressive headstone. "Or were we just seeing the parts of each other that we thought we understood?" Elena considered this. "Maybe both. The thing is, I've spent my whole life around politicians and power brokers. I know how they think, how they operate. But I've also spent 5 years in the Army, and I know what real leadership looks like. When I saw your father dismissing your service, it wasn't just personal offense, it was professional outrage." Marcus nodded. "And when I saw you at that party, I assumed you were just another privileged kid playing dress-up in uniform. I couldn't see past my own prejudices to recognize that you were a genuine soldier." "The question is," Elena said, turning to face him, "what do we do now? Your father is gradually coming around, the political situation has settled, and we've both gotten what we originally wanted." Marcus took her hand. "What I originally wanted was my father's respect. What I got was something better, the realization that I don't need his approval to know my own worth." "And what I originally wanted was justice for a fellow officer who'd been wronged," Elena replied. "What I got was—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "What?" Marcus prompted. Elena smiled. "What I got was the chance to serve alongside the kind of leader I've always hoped to become." 6 months later, Brigadier General Marcus Brennan stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, surrounded by fellow officers, family members, and distinguished guests. He was being awarded the Legion of Merit for his leadership of the Joint Counterterrorism Task Force, which had successfully disrupted 17 terrorist plots in its first year of operation. Senator Brennan sat in the front row beside his wife Victoria, his face beaming with unmistakable pride as he watched his son receive one of the military's highest honors. Elena, now a major and Marcus's deputy commander, stood at attention with the other officers. As Marcus stepped forward to receive the medal, he caught sight of his father's face and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of completion, of family pride shared rather than withheld. The irony wasn't lost on him. It had taken a brilliant young officer, who was about to become his stepsister, to teach both father and son what they should have known all along, that respect isn't inherited or demanded, but earned through actions, sacrifice, and dedication to something greater than oneself. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the reception hall, Elena approached Marcus with a slight smile. "Any regrets, General?" she asked. Marcus looked across the room at his father, who was deep in conversation with Admiral Chen about military funding, appropriations, actually listening and asking intelligent questions for once. "About which part?" Marcus replied. "The years of trying to win approval I didn't need. The public humiliation that finally forced the truth into the open, or the fact that it took my future stepsister to teach my father who his son really was." "Any of it. All of it." Marcus considered the question seriously. "You know what? No regrets. If things had happened differently, I might never have learned to value my own achievements for what they are, rather than for how my father saw them. And I might never have met the most brilliant strategic mind I've ever encountered." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Is that your professional assessment, General?" "Among other things," Marcus replied with a smile. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. His father's mockery had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for a transformation that went far beyond simply correcting misperceptions. It had forced Marcus to confront his own need for external validation, had introduced him to Elena and had ultimately led to a deeper understanding between father and son. The revenge Elena had orchestrated had been perfect in its execution, but its true value lay not in the humiliation it had caused his father, but in the truth it had revealed to everyone present. Standing in that reception hall, wearing the stars of a brigadier general and surrounded by colleagues who respected his achievements, Marcus realized that the best revenge had been living well, serving honorably, and finally allowing his true accomplishments to speak for themselves. And sometimes, he thought, as he watched Elena command the attention of a group of senior officers with her insights on counter-terrorism strategy, the best revenge is finding someone who sees your worth without needing to be convinced of it first. The young captain who had approached him that night at his father's engagement party had become Major Elena Ashford, his partner in both military service and life. The father who had mocked him in front of Washington's elite had become Senator William Brennan, a man who now spoke with genuine pride about his son's military career. But most importantly, the lieutenant colonel who had stood humiliated and isolated that night had become Brigadier General Marcus Brennan, a leader who had learned to value his own worth independent of others' opinions, while still appreciating the support of those who truly understood the meaning of service and sacrifice. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus's father approached him one final time. "Son," Senator Brennan said, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before, "I know I can't undo the years of misunderstanding, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not just for tonight, but for the man you've become despite my failures as a father." Marcus extended his hand, but his father pulled him into an embrace instead. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "That means more than you know." As his father walked away, Elena appeared at Marcus's side. "Happy ending?" she asked. Marcus looked around the hall, at the symbols of honor and service that surrounded them, at the life he'd built through dedication and sacrifice, at the woman who had helped him reclaim his sense of worth. "No," he said finally. "Happy beginning."